When love bleeds but doesn't die. A light rain fell on the Vermont mountains. The sky, tinted grey and gold, reflected in the window of the small wooden house where Charlotte used to make coffee every morning. It was early, so early that the silence of the street seemed to breathe along with her. That morning, something was different. The smell of coffee, which had once brought back sweet memories, now mingled with a pain she couldn't yet name. On the table lay a crumpled envelope, written in the handwriting of someone who hadn't slept well. It was her husband's, Daniel. She didn't open it right away. She stared at it for a few seconds, as if the paper might answer what her heart didn't want to ask. The wind blew the curtains, and the distant sound of a train echoed among the hills. Charlotte took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and felt the knot in her chest tighten. Something was falling apart, slowly, silently, like the end of a beautiful dream. But before the tears fell, she remembered the first day she saw him, at the town fair, the sun shining on his face, the simple smile of someone who owed nothing to life. And then he thought, how could something so pure be lost? The letter trembled in her hands. The words she hadn't yet read already hurt, as if her body knew what her heart refused to accept. "If you love someone, set them free," he had written on the first line. It was enough for the tears to finally come, hot, uncontrolled, carrying everything she had kept inside for months. The city was still asleep, and no one could imagine what was happening inside that house with blue windows. But what Charlotte did not know, and the audience did not yet know either, is that this would be the beginning of something much bigger than a betrayal. It would be the beginning of a quiet miracle, the power of forgiveness. Have you ever wondered how far love can go when the heart is broken? This is the story of Charlotte and Daniel, and maybe, in some way, it's yours too. Subscribe to the channel and share this video with your friends, because sometimes hearing a story like this can heal what we didn't even know was still hurting before love was gone. In the months leading up to that letter, Charlotte's life was simple and, in a way, happy. She worked part-time at the town's small library, an old building that smelled of paper and wet wood. She loved organizing books, stacking stories, and watching the silent comings and goings of people searching for answers in the pages she herself had read so many times. Daniel was a carpenter. He spent his days in his workshop, which was located at the back of the house. The sound of the hammer was, for her, the rhythm of domestic life. Sometimes he would come into the kitchen with his face smeared with sawdust, hug her from behind, and tell her that the smell of coffee and her was all he needed to keep going. They had no children, and there was a silence that lived between the two. They tried for years, and when their attempts turned into tiredness, the matter was swallowed up by routine. Still, there was tenderness. There was partnership. On Saturday mornings they strolled through the market. She always bought dried flowers to put in a vase on the table, and he joked with the vendor. Small joys, simple and sincere. At night they read together, she with her love of novels, and he with his books on tools and woodworking designs. And when the cold came, because in Vermont the cold always comes early, the two of them would cover themselves with the same blanket and sit in silence, listening to the crackling of the fireplace. That was where Charlotte believed she was safe. There, where life seemed peaceful and love stable. But what she didn't realize was that Daniel, for some time now, had no longer been fully present. There was a subtle distance, a lost look, an automatic response, an absence disguised as weariness. Charlotte, in her usual sweetness, thought it was the weight of routine, the cold, or perhaps the worries of work. He didn't insist. And that was the first mistake. In a small town, time seems to pass more slowly, but the silence is always louder. And as the days passed, Charlotte didn't know that Daniel's heart was beginning to beat in a different rhythm, and that the life she cared for so much was about to melt away like snow in the sun. There was one day in particular that she would remember forever. A golden autumn afternoon, the wind blowing leaves across the porch and him staring off into the distance. She asked if everything was okay. He smiled and replied, "Yeah, just tired." And in that tired smile lived the beginning of the end. Love begins to change tone. The weeks following that autumn afternoon felt the same, but there was something in the air. A kind of new silence, a small emptiness that grew a little larger each day. Charlotte noticed Daniel's absences, but tried not to give them a voice. He would come home from the workshop late, with a distant look in his eyes, and when she asked about his day, he would answer in short sentences. "It was good, querido. I'll tell you later." And then it never came. She began to get used to talking to herself. She talked about the weather, the new bookshelf she was putting up in the library, the pair of birds that had nested in the kitchen window. He listened, but did not hear, and she felt it. She felt the weight of speaking to a heart that was already elsewhere. Sometimes at night she would watch him sleep. His face seemed peaceful, but his breathing was restless, as if even in his dreams he was trying to escape something he couldn't name. Charlotte held his hand for a few seconds, hoping that simple gesture would be enough to bring him back. But Daniel turned onto his side, and the space between them in bed felt like an abyss. In the library, Charlotte hid her tiredness with smiles. She was loved by everyone. The children who went to do their homework, the elderly who spent their afternoons reading the newspaper, and even Mr. Harris, the mailman, who always left a rose on the counter. She thanked him kindly and kept the flower in a glass of water. But inside her, sadness grew silently, like a patient shadow. One random Saturday, Daniel forgot his wedding anniversary. It was the first time in 15 years. She waited until the end of the day, thinking maybe he had a surprise in store. But when she saw him arrive, tired, smelling of varnish, and simply ask what was for dinner, her heart broke. Not with a snap, but slowly, like glass that cracks without falling. Still, Charlotte smiled. He prepared dinner, sat at the table, and pretended that everything was fine. Forgiveness in her was not a choice. It was a reflex. Since she was little, she had learned that to love meant to understand. But no one had taught him how much understanding could hurt. That night she couldn't sleep. He got up, went to the living room and looked at the old photographs. The wedding, the trip to the coast, the friends that time took away. In each image I saw a piece of what they were, or what I thought they still were. And for the first time, he was afraid. Fear of losing not only her husband, but herself within that love that no longer returned the echo of her affection. Over the next few days, he began writing little notes, things he didn't have the courage to say. "I love you, but I feel like I'm losing you. I want to understand what's happening to you. Please talk to me." He kept them in a kitchen drawer, along with his wooden spoons and old recipes. It was as if writing was his way of keeping trying. One afternoon, Daniel arrived early. Charlotte, surprised, smiled and asked if she wanted tea. He nodded, but didn't return the smile. He sat down, looked at his hands, and simply said, "We need to talk." Those were the 3 words she most feared hearing. The clock seemed to stop. The sound of the kettle boiling, but she didn't move. He just sat down in front of him and waited. Daniel took a deep breath and took a while to speak. "It's not you. It's me. I've been feeling confused." That phrase, repeated so often, sounded empty, but there was real pain in it, Charlotte noticed. And instead of anger, she felt compassion so immense it hurt, because despite everything, she still loved him. And sometimes that's what love is, feeling someone else's pain as if it were your own. That night, Daniel slept on the sofa, and she, in her room, stayed looking at the ceiling until dawn. Outside, the rain fell slowly. Inside her, the same sound, that of something leaking, taking away what was once a certainty. But the human heart has a strange way of holding on, even when all seems lost, and deep down Charlotte still believed it was just a phase, that their love was too strong to end. Little did she know that sometimes love doesn't end, it just changes shape. While making coffee the next day, Charlotte looked out the window and saw Daniel drive away. He didn't say where he was going. She watched until the sound of the engine faded into the trees. Then he took a deep breath, wiped away a tear, and thought, "If he comes back, I will forgive him." And there, in that simple moment, without witnesses, she planted the seed of what would become the greatest lesson of her life. When love insists on staying. The days after Daniel's departure were long and silent. Charlotte tried to maintain her routine, but everything seemed to have lost its color. The house, once filled with small sounds, the creaking of the floorboards, the soft tapping of tools, his whistling as he worked, now seemed still, as if even the air had stopped moving. At first, she believed he would come back. She kept his coat in the same place, kept his coffee fresh every morning, and avoided moving anything around the house. It was as if, by preserving everyday life, I could keep hope alive. But the weeks turned into months, and the silence, previously tolerable, began to hurt. Charlotte began walking every day along the dirt road that led to the lake. It was where they used to fish on summer afternoons. There the wind blew differently. It smelled of memory and regret. She sat on the same rock, staring at the reflection in the water, and without realizing it, she spoke to it out loud. She asked why. She asked the wind for answers. She sought within herself what she couldn't find in anyone else. In the library, everyone could tell that something had changed. The smile was still there, but now it came slowly, as if it needed to pass through a fog before appearing. Mrs. Collins, who worked with her, once remarked, "You walk with the look of someone looking for what time has taken away." Charlotte smiled slightly and replied, "Maybe I'll look for what time shouldn't have taken. At night I read a lot, books about forgiveness, faith, old stories of people who started over after loss. Not for comfort, but out of curiosity. I wanted to understand how someone can continue to love after everything is broken. It was in one of these books, a worn copy with a blue cover, that she read a sentence she never forgot. Forgiveness is not the end of love, it's proof that he really existed. Charlotte closed the book and cried, not out of anger nor out of despair. She cried because she understood for the first time that perhaps forgiveness wasn't for Daniel, but for herself. On a cold Sunday, she decided to write a letter, not to send, but to ease the heart. "Daniel," began, "I don't know where you are or if you think of me, but I still feel your absence like someone who feels the cold on their skin. Sometimes I remember you with pain, other times with gratitude. I still don't know what's right, but I'm learning not to blame myself for feeling it." He wrote until dawn. When he finished, he placed the letter in a wooden box, along with the old notes he had written months earlier. Those simple phrases, kept for so long, now seemed to make sense. The next morning, something in her had changed. He got up early, opened the windows, and let the sun in. He made coffee, but this time just one cup. And for the first time since Daniel's departure, she sat down to drink alone, not out of resignation, but out of acceptance. Even so, her heart still ached, because true love, when it breaks, doesn't disappear. It remains in the small memories, in the automatic gestures, in the scents that return when the wind changes. Charlotte began to understand that pain was, in some way, what remained of love, and that perhaps it was necessary to cross it to find peace. Then something unexpected happened. One grey afternoon, upon arriving at the library, he found an envelope on the table. There was no return address. Inside, just a small photo, her and Daniel, laughing in front of the lake. On the back, a sentence written in his handwriting, "I miss home." Charlotte stood there, holding the photo with trembling hands. Her heart raced. She couldn't tell if it was regret, a provocation, or a cry for help. But for the first time, he felt an invisible bridge between them, something time hadn't yet destroyed. He tucked the photo away inside the blue book. And at night, he knelt beside his bed and prayed. She didn't ask him to come back. She just asked for the strength to forgive, even if she didn't understand. In that moment, something calmed inside her, and the silence, which had been empty before, now felt like rest. It was as if, little by little, Charlotte was finding herself again, not as the abandoned wife, but as the woman who learned to love even when the love of another was lost. But fate, with its cruel kindness, still had something in store for her. Something that would completely change the way Charlotte viewed everything she had experienced up until that point. And this clue would come from where she least expected it, the echo of the departed. Weeks have passed since Charlotte received that photo. She kept the envelope in her desk drawer along with the letters she never sent. Sometimes she would pick it up just to feel the weight of the paper between her fingers, as if that small gesture brought her closer to something she couldn't forget. Winter came silently. The bare trees seemed to touch the sky with thin branches, and the city was covered in a whiteness that swallowed all sound. Charlotte now walked with a long scarf and a serene look in her eyes. There was sadness, yes, but also a new calm, the kind of serenity that comes after accepting what cannot be changed. One January morning, the mailman, old Mr. Harris, appeared at the library with a brown package in his hands. "It's for you, Charlotte. It looks old, but the address is correct." She thought it was strange. She hadn't expected anything. He took the package, thanked her, and stared at it for several minutes before opening it. The paper was yellowed, as if it had been stored for months. Inside was a dark-covered notebook, a short note, and a folded photograph. The note read, "I found this among the things Daniel left behind when he moved out of the old workshop. I thought it must be yours. Signed only with the initials, M.T. Charlotte." Felt her heart sink. She opened the notebook, and there were Daniel's notes, sketches of furniture, dimensional calculations, meaningless scribbles, and among them entire pages written in hurried handwriting, as if he'd tried to talk to the paper when he didn't have the courage to speak to her. He read with trembling hands, "I lost myself. It wasn't someone else. It was the void I created. Charlotte deserved a whole man, and I was too broken to be that." She continued reading, slowly, feeling the weight of each word. There, confessed, were the fear, shame, and love he still felt. Daniel hadn't simply run away to live another life. He had run away from himself. Between the pages, he found the photograph, the two of them younger, sitting by the lake. On the back, handwritten, "She always believed in me." And I, a coward, didn't know how to believe in her love. Charlotte closed the notebook and rested her forehead against it. Tears came, not of despair, but of release. The truth, though painful, brought something she didn't know she needed: understanding. And understanding is often the first step toward forgiveness. In the days that followed, something changed in the way she viewed the past. She began to remember Daniel not as the man who betrayed or abandoned her, but as the man who couldn't deal with his own wounds. And strangely, it made her love him differently, without attachment, without anger, just tenderly. Charlotte began writing again. But now her letters weren't filled with pain. They were of gratitude. "Thank you for loving me, even if badly. Thank you for teaching me that love is not about control, it is about surrender. And thank you for letting me learn to live alone." Time passed. The flowers began to bloom again, timidly, amid the melting ice. The city was waking up from winter, and so was she. One cold afternoon, Charlotte decided to head to Daniel's old workshop. The building was empty, the gate ajar, the smell of old wood still lingering in the air. She entered slowly, ran her hand over the dust-covered counter, and found in a corner an old, unfinished frame. Inside it, there was only the outline of a house drawn in pencil. Above, a handwritten phrase, "Home, unfinished." Charlotte smiled through her tears. He realized that perhaps the house Daniel was trying to build was never made of wood. It was hers, inside her, and without realizing it, he had left behind the missing piece so she could finish what they both started. As she left the workshop, the evening light gilded everything. The cold wind touched her face, and she felt for a moment that he was there, not in body, but in presence. And for the first time in a long time, Charlotte whispered softly, "I forgive you, Daniel." The words were lost in the air, but inside her they remained. Soft, true, eternal. And in that moment, the search ended, because sometimes the answer we expect from another is just the echo of what we needed to say to ourselves. But fate had not yet told the last chapter of this story. Something or someone was about to reappear. And with it, Charlotte's chance to understand what it truly means to love without expecting anything in return. When love demands courage. That morning, the sky was the same grayish hue Charlotte felt inside. She woke early, unable to understand why her chest felt so heavy. The smell of coffee wafted from the kitchen, but there was no familiar sound of Daniel's footsteps. The house seemed suspended in a strange silence, not the peaceful silence of a late sleeper, but the silence of something about to break. Charlotte descended the stairs slowly, her heart pounding, as if she already knew what she would find. The table was set for two, but only one plate had been used. On the other side, on the wooden tabletop, was a still warm mug, and a white envelope with her name handwritten on it. She stood there, staring at it. For a moment she wanted to believe it was a love letter, an apology, something banal. But when she touched the envelope, she felt the same coldness that had gripped her heart for days. Charlotte sat down. Her hands trembled. She opened the letter carefully, as if afraid of destroying someone's last words. His handwriting was firm, but different, no longer tender, and as she read, time seemed to stand still. Charlotte, I don't know how to look at you without feeling guilty anymore. It wasn't planned, nor sought. It just happened, and now it's too late to pretend it didn't. There is someone else. I didn't want to hurt you, but I can't keep living a lie. You were always too good for me. And maybe that's why I lost myself. She reread the letter countless times, trying to find a phrase that would comfort her, a window of forgiveness, a line that said, I regret. But there was none. The letter was a farewell disguised as a confession. The wind blew through the open window, scattering dry leaves across the floor, and it was there, in the middle of the kitchen where they had laughed so often together, that Charlotte felt the floor disappear. She didn't cry right away. She didn't scream. He remained silent, staring at the envelope as if he could, with his gaze, undo the words he had written. But words had weight, and once spoken, or written, they never came back. When the tears finally came, they were silent. They rolled down her face like rain without warning, and between sobs, she repeated to herself, Why, Daniel? Why? That day the city seemed oblivious to her pain. People went about their daily lives, storefronts glittered with winter decorations, and the world spun, as if Charlotte's heart hadn't just shattered. That afternoon she walked to his workshop. Each step was a mixture of anger, longing, and disbelief. The smell of wood still lingered, but the space felt empty. On the workbench, an unfinished frame sat. Inside was a photo of the two of them, taken the previous summer, when they still believed their love was unbreakable. Charlotte held the frame, and for the first time allowed herself to scream. It was a scream held back by months of foreboding fear and repressed love. A scream that echoed between the walls and was lost in the afternoon wind, taking with it everything that remained of the woman she had been until that day. And yet, amidst the pain, something inside her began to shift. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It was just the beginning of a bitter realization that sometimes love doesn't die. It just becomes what remains after the end. When we understand what really matters, the cold days of January began to give way to brighter mornings. Charlotte, now with slower steps and an introspective look, walked along the path around the lake, a place that had always been a refuge. The wind blew dry leaves, and each sound seemed to whisper memories of laughter, looks and gestures that had marked her and Daniel's lives. She carried with her the notebook she had found in the workshop. His words, the photograph, the unfinished frame, all of it now carried a new weight, no longer pain or anger, but understanding. Charlotte sat on the rock where they used to lean, opened the notebook and reread, Charlotte deserves a whole man, and I was too broken to be that. She took a deep breath, and for the first time in months, she smiled without guilt. She understood that forgiveness wasn't about Daniel. It was about her, about freeing her heart from the anger, expectation and pain she'd held on to since he'd left. At that moment, Charlotte realized the secret that life had hidden. True love is not measured by the time we spend together, nor by the absence or presence of the other. It is measured by the ability to continue loving, even when the other fails. For the power to transform pain into learning and compassion. for the value of allowing yourself to be whole, even after feeling broken. The following weeks were spent in quiet rebuilding. She carefully and thoughtfully organized the library again, but now she left more space for her own soul. He walked along the lake, but he no longer expected anything from anyone. He tended the front garden, planting new flowers, purple, yellow, and white, as if each petal were a sliver of hope. One afternoon, when he opened the notebook again, he found one last note from Daniel. "If you ever forgive me, I hope it will be for yourself, not for me, and live fully, because the world is too beautiful to be stuck in the past." Charlotte closed her notebook, felt the wind blow on her face, and took a deep breath. There was no more hurt. There was no more guilt. The pain was still there, but now it was memory, a memory that taught. She stood, looked out at the lake, and whispered, "I have lived, I have forgiven, and I can love again in whatever way life allows." That afternoon, the small town seemed to glow with a different hue. The sun reflected on the water, the leaves trembled in the wind, and Charlotte realized that love, even broken, always finds a way to continue, whether in memories, lessons learned, or the ability to forgive. And finally, she understood. The secret was not in Daniel, but in herself, in the power to love without expecting anything in return, in the power to rebuild even when everything seemed lost. Have you ever experienced something similar? Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel and share this video with your friends. The love that teaches how to live. Charlotte walked along the porch, the sun touching her face, the wind playing with her hair. Her heart still carried memories of pain, but there was lightness. The silence, once heavy, was now rest, and every gesture, every breath seemed to remind her that she had learned to forgive, to find herself again, and to move on. She looked at the lake, where so many memories of the past were stored, and smiled. He understood that life doesn't demand perfection, nor complete answers. It demands the courage to feel, learn, and forgive. And that's what truly transforms. Have you ever experienced something similar? Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel and share this video with your friends.